No one expected Marcus Chen to freeze at the altar, not in a cathedral overflowing with orchids and champagne glasses, not when the quartet was already fading into silence for the vows. But then she appeared, an elderly woman with silver hair and worn clothes, moving slowly through the crowd. Security rushed forward, but before they could reach her, she leaned close to Marcus and whispered 7 words that made his face go pale as death. The billionaire's hands started shaking. The entire cathedral stopped breathing. And in that moment of absolute silence, one truth was about to shatter everything he thought he knew about his life. But before we dive into this story, please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. And if stories about unexpected kindness and life-changing truths move you, you'll want to stay until the very end. Trust me, you won't see this coming. Long before that cathedral moment, before the designer suits and the fleet of cars, before anyone whispered the name Marcus Chen with envy, he lived by one simple rule. Every single morning, no matter what was waiting at the office, he drove himself to work. No chauffeur, no security detail, just Marcus, alone with his thoughts, windows cracked open to let the city air in. And every morning at exactly 7:15, his car would slow down near the old transit station on Harbor Street in Seattle. That's where he first noticed her. Eleanor Hayes. She sat on a weathered wooden bench near the bus shelter, her back slightly curved with age, a small cardboard box resting on her lap. Inside were lottery tickets, a few packs of gum, and nothing else. No aggressive calls for attention. No chasing after passers-by. Just waiting. The first time Marcus saw her, he barely registered her presence. His mind was drowning in contracts, shipment delays, numbers that never stopped demanding attention. His phone rang. He pulled over, searching for better reception. That's when her soft voice reached through his open window. "Excuse me, sir. Please." Marcus turned. She stood slowly, favoring her left leg. Her clothes were faded, but spotlessly clean. Her hair was pulled back in a simple gray bun. Her eyes, deep brown and exhausted, met his without begging, just asking. "I don't need much," she said. "Just $12. Marcus frowned. People asked him for money constantly. Business associates wanting investments. Charities wanting donations. Random strangers who somehow recognized his face. They asked for thousands, tens of thousands, entire futures. But this woman? $12? That's all? He asked, genuinely surprised. She nodded. "That's all I need today." Something about the way she emphasized today unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Marcus reached for his wallet, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and handed it to her. "Keep the change." She didn't smile widely or bow or launch into elaborate blessings. She simply said, "Thank you, sir. May God keep you safe." As he drove away, Marcus told himself it was nothing. Just another morning transaction in a city full of them. But the next day, there she was again. Same bench, same box, same quiet dignity. When his car slowed, she stood carefully. "Good morning, sir," she said gently. "Please, $12. Marcus hesitated, confusion creeping into his voice. "Didn't I give you money yesterday?" "Yes," she replied calmly, "and I was very grateful. So why are you asking again?" "Because yesterday is finished," she said simply. That answer stayed with him all day, echoing in his mind during meetings he barely paid attention to. He gave her the money. By the third day, she didn't even need to ask. She simply looked at him, and Marcus found himself reaching for his wallet before a single word was spoken. $12. Always $12. Every morning, rain pouring down or sun blazing overhead. Traffic jammed or streets empty. Busy schedule or rare free day. Eleanor Hayes was always there, and she always asked for the exact same amount. Never more, never less. After 2 weeks, Marcus noticed something that made him curious enough to break his routine. Eleanor never spent the money anywhere near the transit station. Sometimes, when he had a few extra minutes, he'd park across the street and watch from inside his car, feeling slightly ridiculous but unable to stop himself. Eleanor would wait until his car disappeared around the corner. Then she'd make her way slowly to a small pharmacy 3 blocks down. Other days, she'd buy fresh bread from a street vendor. Occasionally, she'd hand exact change to a bus driver, even though she walked most places. No alcohol, no lottery tickets for herself, despite selling them. No visible waste. Once curiosity got the better of him entirely, Marcus followed her from a distance, careful to stay unnoticed. She entered St. Mary's Public Hospital, one of those overcrowded places most people avoided unless they had absolutely no other choice. He watched through the glass doors as she spoke to someone at the registration desk, pulling out crumpled bills from her pocket. She counted them carefully. $12. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his mother, Lin Chen. He hadn't thought about her final years in a very long time. Not like this. Not with this crushing clarity. Lin had raised him and his younger brother Samuel alone after their father left. She'd worked double shifts at a laundromat, cleaned office buildings at night. And when she fell ill, when the money ran out and the medical bills piled higher than hope, she too had stood near bus stops asking strangers for help. Marcus sat up in bed, heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The next morning, something in him broke. He drove past the transit station without slowing down. Eleanor watched his car disappear. She didn't chase after him, didn't shout or wave frantically. She simply sat back down on her bench, hands folded in her lap. That image haunted Marcus through every meeting, every phone call, every moment of his expensive, carefully constructed day. By evening, guilt pressed against his chest so hard he could barely breathe. The following morning, Marcus arrived earlier than usual, before most of the city had woken up. Eleanor was already there, as if she'd never left. When she saw him, she didn't look surprised or relieved. "I knew you would return," she said softly. "Ow?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. She smiled faintly, sadly. People always do when they remember who they used to be. Marcus handed her the $12, then paused. Why that amount? Why always 12? Eleanor looked at him for a long, measuring moment. "Because that is what I once needed," she replied. "And someone gave it to me." Marcus swallowed hard. "Who?" She shook her head gently. That's not a story for the roadside. From that day forward, something fundamental changed between them. Marcus didn't just hand over the money and leave. He greeted her, asked if she was well, asked if her leg was bothering her, asked if she'd eaten breakfast. Eleanor answered politely, kindly, but never invited deeper questions. And she never, ever crossed one particular line. She never asked his name, never asked what he did for a living, never asked where he lived or if he had family. She treated him like a passing stranger, even though they saw each other every single morning without fail. Then one afternoon, Marcus mentioned her casually at home. Victoria Sterling looked up from her tablet, perfectly manicured eyebrows rising slightly. "The old woman?" she asked, voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, the one near the transit station." Victoria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Why are you still giving her money?" "It's not much," Marcus said with a shrug. "That's not the point, darling." Victoria set down her tablet with deliberate care. "People like that become dependent. You're enabling her." Marcus stiffened. "She asked for $12, Victoria." "That's it." Victoria laughed softly, condescendingly. "Today it's 12. Tomorrow it'll be something else. They always want more eventually." But tomorrow came, and Eleanor asked for $12. Nothing more, nothing less. As the weeks passed, Marcus began to feel something unfamiliar stirring in his chest whenever he saw her waiting on that bench. Not pity exactly, something closer to recognition, as if her presence was tied to something unfinished in his own life, something waiting to be uncovered. And far away, unknown to Marcus, Eleanor Hayes began counting days. Not the days until her money ran out, but the days until Marcus Chen would finally remember the truth that connected them. What was Eleanor really waiting for? And why did $12 matter so much? The answer will change everything. Keep watching. Eleanor Hayes' days followed a rhythm the rushing city never noticed. Before sunrise painted Seattle's skyline orange and pink, before car horns and coffee shops swallowed the quiet, she was already awake. Her small room, Barely more than a converted storage space behind Mr. Kim's automotive shop held only what she truly needed. A narrow mattress with clean, threadbare sheets, a wooden chair with one shorter leg, a Bible so worn the edges had gone soft, and a framed photograph placed carefully on the windowsill where morning light could touch it. Every single morning, she sat on the edge of her bed, gently massaging her left leg. The old injury had never healed right. Some days it felt like fire spreading through her bones. Other days it went numb, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. She never complained. Not once. Not to anyone. After wrapping her thin shawl around her shoulders and smoothing her faded dress, Eleanor would lower herself carefully to her knees and pray. "God," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady with faith, "thank you for another day of breath. Give strength to the man who gives without asking why. And give me patience to wait just a little longer." She didn't ask for wealth, didn't ask for miracles or healing. She asked for time, just enough time. At the transit station, Eleanor took her familiar place as the city exploded into chaotic life around her. Vendors shouted competing prices. Bus drivers argued about routes. Children with backpacks too big for their small bodies ran between parked buses, laughing despite everything. And people passed her, hundreds of them every single day. Eyes forward, hearts elsewhere, lives too full and too rushed to notice one old woman on a bench. Eleanor never stopped them, never called out desperately. She simply waited. Some mornings Marcus Chen arrived early, car appearing before most commuters filled the streets. Other mornings, traffic delayed him, and she'd watch the minutes tick by without worry. But Eleanor never doubted he would come, and every time he did, she watched his face carefully, not greedily, not desperately, as if she was reading something written beneath his skin that he couldn't see himself. After receiving the $12, Eleanor followed the same careful path every time. First, the pharmacy on Morrison Street. She bought medicine for her blood pressure, always the cheapest generic brand available. The young pharmacist, Rosa, knew her well by now and often tried to give her extra. "Take more, Mrs. Hayes," Rosa would say, concern creasing her forehead. "You'll need it." Eleanor always shook her head firmly. "No, sweet girl. Others need it too." Next, she stopped at Paolo's bread stand and bought a single small loaf. She'd tear in half right there. Half for now, half for later. Some days she'd share pieces with the street kids who hovered nearby, watching with hungry eyes. They called her Grandma. She never told them her real name. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Eleanor made her way to St. Mary's Public Hospital. Not for herself, never for herself. In one of the overcrowded wards lay an elderly woman named Grace who could no longer speak, whose family had stopped visiting years ago. Once, when Eleanor herself had nothing but a sleeping mat and fear, Grace had shared that mat without question. Eleanor paid for Grace's basic care whenever she could. $12. Always $12. Meanwhile, Marcus's curiosity about Eleanor deepened like roots growing in secret. He began noticing things. How Eleanor never lingered near expensive shops, never followed well-dressed strangers down street, never tried to make herself more visible or pitiable to increase her chances. She simply existed with quiet dignity. One morning, rain poured so heavily the gutters overflowed and the sky turned gray as steel. Marcus assumed Eleanor wouldn't come, but there she was, sitting beneath a torn umbrella that barely covered her head, her worn shoes completely soaked through, waiting. Marcus pulled over immediately, genuine concern slipping into his voice before he could stop it. "Why are you here in this weather?" She smiled faintly, water dripping from her umbrella's broken edge. "Rain doesn't cancel waiting, sir." Marcus laughed despite himself, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're unbelievable." "No," Eleanor replied gently. "I'm patient." That word, patient, pressed against something deep and hidden inside Marcus's chest. Over the following weeks, Marcus began bringing extra items in his car. A bottle of water on hot days. Fresh fruit sometimes. Once a thick shawl when autumn turned cold. Eleanor accepted everything politely, gratefully, but something about her posture remained unchanged. She never leaned in closer, never grew familiar or presumptuous, never tried to cross the invisible line between them. It was Marcus who kept crossing into her world, not the other way around. One afternoon, unable to resist any longer, Marcus parked his car and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The people nearby froze mid-step. Some recognized him instantly. His face had been in business magazines, tech journals, the society pages. Phones appeared. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. Eleanor looked up, genuinely startled. "You shouldn't stand here," she said, quickly worried. "People will talk, sir." Marcus smiled warmly. "Let them talk." He sat down beside her on the concrete bench. The surface was hard, hot from the sun, unforgiving against his expensive suit. Marcus didn't care, even a little bit. They sat in companionable silence for a long moment, traffic roaring behind them like a constant ocean wave. "Do you have children?" Marcus asked gently, carefully. Eleanor's weathered fingers tightened around her Bible. She was quiet for so long Marcus thought she might not answer. "I had a daughter," she finally said, voice barely above a whisper. Marcus waited, giving her space. "She was strong," Eleanor continued, staring at something far beyond the street. "Braver than I ever was. She loved too deeply, trusted too much." Her voice softened until it almost disappeared. The world wasn't kind to her. Marcus felt his chest tighten painfully. "I'm so sorry." "So am I," Eleanor said. "Every single day of my life." He wanted to ask more, wanted to understand, but something told him not to push. Instead, he asked, "Why do you keep waiting here?" Eleanor looked straight ahead at the buses and cars and rushing people. "Because someone I'm waiting for will pass by here." Marcus smiled gently, confused. "You already see hundreds of people every day." "Yes," she said simply, "but only one matters." That night, Marcus dreamed of his mother. Not as she was when she died, weak and pale and barely breathing, but as she was when he was small, laughing loudly, sweating under the summer sun, holding his hand so tightly it almost hurt as buses roared past them on busy streets. When Marcus woke, his pillow was damp with tears he didn't remember crying. The next morning, he arrived at the transit station shaken, off balance in a way he couldn't explain. Eleanor noticed immediately, the way she always seemed to notice everything. "You're carrying heavy thoughts today," she observed quietly. Marcus exhaled shakily. "You remind me of someone." She nodded slowly, knowingly. Most important things do. From that day forward, Marcus stopped seeing Eleanor as a mourning responsibility or an act of charity. He saw her as a mirror reflecting something he'd lost or forgotten or buried too deep to reach. He adjusted his entire schedule to ensure he never missed seeing her. He defended her when Victoria questioned him with increasing sharpness. He even instructed his assistant never to schedule early meetings that would make him late. Eleanor remained exactly the same, still asking for $12, still thanking him quietly, still waiting with infinite patience. And every time Marcus handed her that money, he felt something old and painful loosening inside him. A knot tied long ago by poverty and loss and questions no one had ever answered. He didn't know what Eleanor was truly waiting for, but he felt it in his bones, in his blood, in the part of him that remembered being a frightened child. Whatever it was coming closer with every passing day. Marcus is about to discover why Eleanor chose him. And when he does, everything will shatter. Don't stop now. Victoria, Sterling noticed the change in Marcus Chen before he ever mentioned Eleanor Hayes' name a second time. At first, it showed up in small ways. Marcus stopped taking phone calls during his morning drive. He drove more slowly, almost deliberately. He arrived at their penthouse quieter than usual, his mind clearly somewhere else entirely, somewhere Victoria couldn't reach. Victoria had known Marcus long enough to recognize when something was occupying his thoughts. And whatever this was, it definitely wasn't business pressure or investment strategy. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Marcus's downtown penthouse overlooking Seattle's glittering skyline, Victoria finally asked directly. "You've been distracted lately," she said, swirling wine in her crystal glass. "Is something wrong at work?" Marcus shook his head. Works fine. Then what is it? She pressed, her blue eyes narrowing slightly with concern, or maybe suspicion. You disappear every morning. No calls, no driver, no explanation whatsoever. Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He hadn't planned to talk about Eleanor again. Something about the old woman felt deeply private, almost sacred. But Victoria was his fiancée. Soon she'd be his wife. Secrets felt wrong. There's an elderly woman I help, he said slowly, carefully. Victoria blinked, setting her glass down with precise control. Help? Yes, near the transit station. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. Help how exactly? Marcus shrugged as if it were nothing. I give her some money. Every day. How much? $12. Victoria laughed, short, sharp, genuinely surprised. Every single day? Yes. For how long now? A few weeks. Maybe 6. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying Marcus as if he'd just confessed to something foolish or dangerous. Marcus, do you realize how many people hang around transit stations specifically looking for sympathy? She's not like that, Marcus replied instantly, defensively. Victoria raised one perfectly groomed eyebrow. You sound very sure about that. I am sure. Victoria sighed, her expression shifting to something meant to look like concern. Listen to yourself. You don't even know her name, do you? Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it slowly. Victoria noticed immediately. You don't, she said quietly, triumphantly. Marcus, this is exactly how people get taken advantage of. They attach themselves emotionally, then guilt you, then make you dependent on the feeling of helping them. She never asked for more, Marcus said firmly. Never. Victoria crossed her arms, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. That's exactly how it starts, darling. Marcus felt irritation rising hot in his chest. You haven't even met her. And I don't need to, Victoria replied coolly. I've seen this pattern before. People attach themselves to successful men. Then they manipulate emotions. Then they create dependencies. That hasn't happened. Victoria's tone sharpened like a blade. Not yet. But you're a public figure, Marcus. You're about to become my husband. What happens when the media finds out you've been secretly giving money to some random stranger? Marcus's jaw tightened visibly. I'm not ashamed of helping someone who needs help. Victoria paused, then deliberately softened her voice. A calculated shift Marcus recognized but couldn't quite resist. I'm not saying you should stop helping people entirely. I'm saying there are proper channels, foundations, programs, not random individuals on street corners. Marcus stood abruptly. This conversation isn't about charity strategy, Victoria. No, Victoria replied, standing too, matching his energy. It's about boundaries, about protecting what we're building together. That word, boundaries, landed hard between them. The next morning, Victoria insisted on riding with Marcus to see Eleanor for herself. I want to meet her, Victoria announced, already dressed in designer heels that clicked sharply across the marble floor. Marcus frowned. That's really not necessary. I'm coming, Victoria replied with absolute finality. If she's as harmless as you claim, there shouldn't be any problem, right? Marcus said nothing because arguing would only make things worse. At the transit station, Eleanor Hayes was already in her usual spot despite the early hour. Victoria spotted her immediately, took in the old woman's posture, her worn clothing, the small box balanced on her lap, and assessed everything with a critical, calculating eye. She watched silently as Marcus slowed the car and rolled down his window. Eleanor smiled when she saw Marcus. Then she noticed Victoria sitting in the passenger seat. Her gentle smile faded slightly, not from fear, but from awareness, recognition of what this moment meant. Marcus handed Eleanor the $12. Good morning, Mrs. Hayes. Eleanor accepted the money with quiet grace. Good morning, sir. She nodded politely toward Victoria. You're welcome here, ma'am. Victoria didn't return the greeting. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, voice sharp and direct. Why are you here every single day? Eleanor turned to face her calmly. Because this is where I wait, ma'am. For what? Victoria asked bluntly. Eleanor's eyes flicked briefly to Marcus, then returned to Victoria. For what God has promised. Victoria scoffed quietly, barely hiding her contempt. And God promised you $12 for my fiancé? Marcus stiffened immediately. Victoria, Eleanor raised one weathered hand, slightly, gently. It's all right, sir. She looked at Victoria again with eyes that held no anger, only patience. Young woman, I don't take what isn't given freely. Victoria folded her arms across her chest. And how long do you plan to keep taking? As long as it's offered, Eleanor replied simply. The silence between them grew thick and uncomfortable. Marcus felt something close to real anger rising in his chest, hot and unfamiliar. Victoria, that's enough. She exhaled sharply through her nose. Fine, let's go. As they drove away, Victoria stared out the window, lips pressed into a thin, tight line. She's clever, Victoria said after a long, tense moment. Very clever indeed. Marcus said nothing at all because he didn't trust what might come out if he opened his mouth. That afternoon, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. She called the head of security at the cathedral where their wedding was scheduled. There's a woman, Victoria said smoothly, professionally. An elderly woman who frequents the Harbor Street transit station. If she tries to attend the wedding ceremony, she's not to be allowed inside under any circumstances. The security chief hesitated. Is she a threat, ma'am? Victoria paused for just a heartbeat. She's unstable, unpredictable. Understood completely, Miss Sterling. That same evening, Marcus arrived home unusually late, exhausted from back-to-back meetings. He found Victoria waiting, documents spread carefully across their dining table. I spoke to Samuel today, Victoria said casually, not looking up. Marcus froze mid-step. About what? Your mother, Victoria replied. Or rather, about her final years. Marcus's blood turned to ice in his veins. Why the hell would you do that? Victoria looked up, expression perfectly controlled. Because you're hiding something from me, Marcus. I can feel it. I'm not hiding anything, he said, voice tight and strained. My mother is gone. That's all there is to say. Yes, Victoria said slowly, carefully. And apparently, she spent her final years poor, desperate, asking strangers for money just to survive. Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Stop talking. Right now. Victoria leaned forward, voice dropping to something meant to sound gentle but felt like a weapon. Don't you see the pattern, darling? That woman reminds you of your mother. That's why you can't let her go. You're trying to save someone who's already gone. Marcus turned away, jaw working, unable to speak. Victoria softened her tone even more, practiced, calculated. Marcus, I love you deeply, but you can't build our future while clinging to ghosts from your past. Marcus didn't respond. Couldn't respond. The next morning, Marcus was delayed by an urgent crisis at one of his construction sites. When he finally arrived at the transit station, 20 minutes late, heart pounding with inexplicable anxiety, Eleanor Hayes wasn't there. He waited. 10 minutes. 20. 30. She never came. An unfamiliar, uncomfortable unease settled deep in Marcus's chest like a stone. Across the city, Eleanor Hayes stood outside the towering cathedral gates, leaning heavily on her walking stick, looking up at the massive building with its doors still closed to the public. It's almost time, she whispered to herself, to God, to the daughter she'd lost so many years ago. Almost time for the truth. And for the first time in weeks, Eleanor Hayes did not wait at the bus terminal. Why did Eleanor disappear? And what truth is she preparing to reveal? The wedding is coming. And so is everything Marcus has been running from. Stay with me. The absence hit Marcus Chen harder than any business failure ever had. At first, he told himself it was nothing unusual. People miss days for 1,000 legitimate reasons. Life happened. Illness. Errands. Emergencies. But as the minutes stretched at the transit station and the morning crowd grew louder around his parked car, Marcus's unease refused to fade. Eleanor Hayes was never late. Never absent. Not once in all these weeks. Marcus drove past the terminal twice, circling back like maybe he'd somehow missed her. But the bench remained empty. Her small box was nowhere in sight. Finally, reluctantly, he continued to his office. The contracts waiting on his desk felt distant, meaningless. His pen hovered above signature lines while memories he hadn't invited began surfacing like bodies rising from deep water. His mother, Lin Chun. He hadn't planned to think about her that morning, yet her face appeared with disturbing clarity. The deep lines around her eyes that came from worrying, never sleeping enough. The way she tied her faded headscarf extra tight when bills were overdue. The soft humming sound she made while counting coins late at night, trying to stretch nothing into something. Lynn had been proud. Too proud for her own good, Marcus's uncle used to say. She never spoke about the worst days, not to her sons. Marcus only learned the full truth after she was gone. How she'd lost her laundromat job when the owner sold the business. How the rent fell further and further behind. How sickness crept in quietly, stealing her strength week by week, day by day. And how one desperate afternoon, she'd taken young Marcus by the hand and walked to a bus terminal not unlike the one Eleanor sat beside. She had asked strangers for help. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to survive another day, another week. Marcus remembered that afternoon now with painful clarity. The shame that burned in his child's chest, the way he'd stared at the cracked pavement while adults walked past without seeing them, without caring. He remembered one woman stopping, an older woman with kind eyes and hands rough from hard work. That woman had given his mother money, $12. Marcus's chest tightened until he could barely breathe. At the office, he called his brother Samuel immediately. "Do you remember anything about the woman who helped Mom?" Marcus asked without any greeting or small talk. Samuel hesitated on the other end. "Why are you asking about this now, Marcus? Just answer me, please." "I was younger than you were," Samuel said slowly, carefully. "But I remember an older woman. She walked with a limp. Used to bring us bread sometimes when Mom couldn't afford groceries." Marcus closed his eyes, the truth crashing over him like a wave he couldn't escape. The resemblance was no longer a coincidence. That evening, Marcus drove back to the transit station long after sunset. Vendors were packing up their goods. Buses pulled away in clouds of exhaust. Eleanor's bench sat empty under the flickering streetlight. "Have you seen the old woman who sits here?" Marcus asked a nearby vendor desperately. The man shook his head. "Not today, friend. What about yesterday? Maybe early morning?" The man shrugged. But she told some of the kids she wouldn't be coming anymore. Marcus's heart skipped several beats. She said that. Yeah, said goodbye to them and everything. Gave them each a piece of bread. Marcus drove home in complete silence, mind racing, heart pounding. At the penthouse, Victoria noticed his agitation immediately. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, concern creeping into her perfectly controlled voice. Marcus ignored her completely and went straight to his private study. He pulled out an old cardboard box he hadn't opened in years, maybe a decade. His mother's things, letters written in her careful handwriting, old receipts, hospital paperwork he'd never been able to throw away. At the very bottom, folded carefully, lay a piece of paper, a name written in his mother's hand. Eleanor Hayes. Marcus stared at it, his breathing shallow and rapid. Victoria appeared in the doorway, watching him with wary eyes. "You found something?" "Yes," Marcus replied, voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Something you didn't want me to find." Victoria crossed her arms defensively. "What are you talking about?" "That woman," Marcus said, standing slowly. "Eleanor. She knew my mother. She helped my mother." Victoria scoffed dismissively. "Marcus, you're projecting your grief." "She helped us," Marcus continued, voice rising. "When we had nothing, when no one else would stop. She gave my mother $12 so we could eat." Victoria's expression hardened. "Even if that's somehow true, it doesn't change anything about our situation now." "It changes everything," Marcus snapped, louder than he'd ever spoken to her. Victoria stepped closer, voice sharp. "What exactly do you think this means? That she's entitled to your life? Your wedding? Your future? She waited decades, and now she gets to control you through guilt." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in a long time. "I think it means I owe her a hell of a lot more than $12. Victoria shook her head firmly. This obsession is dangerous, Marcus. Can't you see that? The word obsession hit him like a slap. Obsessed. Marcus repeated quietly, dangerously. Victoria didn't back down. Yes, obsessed. Marcus turned away from her. The next several days passed in unbearable tension. Eleanor didn't return to the transit station. Not once. Marcus sent his assistant to search nearby clinics, shelters, community centers. Nothing. No sign of Eleanor Hayes anywhere. The unease grew into something closer to dread, settling heavy in Marcus's stomach. Meanwhile, Victoria focused entirely on the wedding with laser precision. Invitations finalized. Seating arrangements confirmed. Security tightened. Every single detail was perfect. Too perfect. The night before the wedding, Marcus couldn't sleep at all. He stood on the penthouse balcony at 3 in the morning, staring at the city lights spread below like scattered diamonds, wondering how a woman who asked for so little had come to mean so impossibly much. Across town, Eleanor Hayes sat on a wooden bench outside the cathedral grounds. She had arrived hours earlier, moving slowly and painfully, leaning heavily on her walking stick. The security guards at the gate had watched her with obvious suspicion, but said nothing yet. She wasn't causing trouble. She was simply waiting. In her worn canvas bag, wrapped carefully in soft cloth, lay a small envelope. Inside, it was an old hospital identification bracelet, faded and cracked with age, bearing a name Marcus would recognize instantly. Lin Chun. Eleanor touched the bracelet gently through the fabric. You said he would come back to himself, she whispered, to the memory, to the ghost, to God. And you were right. He came back. Morning arrived with golden light and celebration. The city woke to music and excitement. Cars lined the streets for blocks. Guests arrived dressed in silk and diamonds and designer labels. Inside the cathedral's private preparation room, Marcus stood alone, adjusting his cufflinks with shaking hands. Samuel watched him closely, brotherly concern written across his face. You don't look happy, Marcus. I'm not sure I should be here, Marcus admitted quietly. Samuel frowned deeply. What do you mean? Marcus hesitated, then spoke the truth. If the past is still knocking on my door, maybe I shouldn't be walking forward yet. Maybe I need to answer it first. Samuel opened his mouth to respond, but the door swung open. Victoria stepped inside, absolutely radiant in white lace and silk. Hey, she said softly, forcing a gentle smile. For today, let's just forget everything else that's happened. Okay. Marcus looked at her, searching her face for something he couldn't name. He wondered what would happen if he didn't forget. If he couldn't. Outside, Eleanor Hayes rose slowly from her bench. As the cathedral doors opened wide and the music began to swell, as Marcus took his first steps toward the altar, the truth he had been avoiding for weeks, for years, for his entire adult life, drew closer with every breath. Tell me in the comments which part has touched your heart so far. And if you've dealt with something similar, with guilt, with ghosts from your past, with truths you didn't want to face, share your story. You're not alone in this. Subscribe for more stories about finding courage when everything feels impossible. The moment is here. The wedding. The truth. The choice that will define everything. Don't you dare stop now. The morning of Marcus Chen's wedding unfolded like a perfectly choreographed performance. White fabric draped the cathedral walls in elegant waves. Flowers lined every aisle in flawless symmetry. Roses and lilies and orchids that cost more than most people earned in a month. Guests filled the polished wooden pews, their expensive perfumes mixing in the air, their whispers floating like silk under the vaulted ceiling. Everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. Picture perfect. Magazine ready. Absolutely flawless. And yet Marcus Chen felt like he was walking into a room where the oxygen was slowly, inevitably running out. As the groom's procession began, gentle applause rippled through the crowd. Camera flashes sparkled like stars. Faces smiled with practiced elegance. Marcus's steps were measured and steady, but oh God, his mind was not. With each movement toward that altar, his thoughts drifted backward, away from Victoria's radiant smile and her perfect white dress, away from the polished shoes and tailored designer suit, back to cracked sidewalks and dusty bus terminals and a quiet old woman who had never asked for anything more than $12. Eleanor Hayes. Marcus scanned the cathedral unconsciously, even though he told himself he wasn't looking for her. She wouldn't be here. Couldn't be here. Victoria had made absolutely certain of that. The ceremony began with Pastor Michael's warm voice speaking about love and partnership and destiny. His tone was calm, practiced, infinitely reassuring. Victoria stood across from Marcus, glowing like something from a dream. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her smile never wavered for even a second. Marcus tried desperately to mirror her composure. But then, movement. Near the very back of the cathedral, a ripple of murmurs spread through the guests like wind through wheat. Marcus's eyes shifted instinctively toward the disturbance. An elderly woman stood just inside the massive doors. Her clothes were plain and worn, her posture bent with age and pain. A wooden walking stick supported most of her weight. For one brief, impossible moment, she looked unbearably small beneath those towering arches and stained glass windows. Eleanor Hayes. Before Marcus could even process what he was seeing, two security guards moved swiftly toward her. "Ma'am, you're not on the guest list," one whispered sharply, urgently. Eleanor nodded calmly, unsurprised. "I know that. Then you need to leave immediately." "I will speak to him first," she said softly, gesturing toward Marcus. "Then I'll go quietly." "That's not possible, ma'am." "Stop." Marcus's voice echoed through the entire cathedral, cutting through music and murmurs like a knife through silk. Everything froze. Every single person. Every breath. Marcus stepped forward, completely ignoring the pastor's startled expression, completely ignoring Victoria's sudden iron grip on his arm. "Let her come forward," Marcus said clearly. The guards hesitated, glancing uncertainly at Victoria. Victoria's face hardened like stone. "Marcus, this is not the time." Marcus didn't even look at her. "Let her come." Eleanor walked slowly down that long aisle. Every step seemed to carry the weight of years, of waiting, of truths too heavy for one person to hold alone. Guests whispered frantically. Phones lifted discreetly. Confusion spread through the crowd like spilled wine across white linen. Eleanor stopped directly in front of Marcus. Up close, she looked thinner than he remembered. Weaker, frilier. Her eyes, however, were absolutely sharp with purpose and unwavering certainty. "You came," Marcus whispered, voice breaking. She nodded once. "I said I would." Victoria stepped forward immediately, voice firm and controlled. "This is completely inappropriate. You're disrupting a sacred ceremony." Eleanor turned to her with infinite calm. "I won't stay long, dear." Then she looked back at Marcus, eyes searching his face. "May I?" she asked quietly. Marcus leaned down instinctively, heart hammering so hard he thought everyone could hear it. The cathedral held its collective breath. Eleanor's lips moved close to his ear, and she whispered 7 words that made the entire world tilt sideways. "You're the boy from the bus terminal, and your mother didn't die the way they told you." Marcus's entire body went completely rigid. The world narrowed to a single, impossible point of sound. "What did you say?" he breathed, barely able to form words. Eleanor placed something into his trembling hand. An old hospital bracelet. Cracked plastic. Faded ink. Marcus stared at it like it might explode. His mother's name. Lin Chun. A low, broken gasp escaped his lips. Victoria's voice cut through the shocked silence. "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" Marcus looked up at her slowly, at the woman he was supposed to marry, standing there beautiful and composed and increasingly impatient. Behind her, years and years of silence began to scream. Marcus straightened, turned to face the entire assembled crowd. "I can't continue," he said quietly but clearly. Victoria laughed nervously, desperately. "You're joking. Tell me you're joking." "I'm not joking." Gasps filled the room like oxygen rushing into a vacuum. Pastor Michael stepped forward carefully. "Son, perhaps we should take a moment." Marcus raised one hand. "I need the truth. Right now." He turned back to Eleanor. Tell me everything. Please. Eleanor nodded, her shoulders sagging as if she'd been carrying this moment for literal decades. Your mother came to me very sick, she began, voice steady despite the tears forming. So sick she could barely walk. She had no money left, no family who could help her anymore. Marcus's throat tightened painfully. She collapsed near the transit station. Eleanor continued. I took her to the hospital. They asked for money before they would treat her. We begged them. We pleaded. Victoria shook her head. This is absolutely not appropriate. Eleanor kept going. They delayed. Your mother waited for hours in terrible pain. By the time help finally came, it was too late. Her body had waited too long. A devastating silence settled over everything. Marcus's hands shook violently. They told me. They said it was sudden. They said she went peacefully. They lied to protect themselves, Eleanor said gently. It wasn't sudden, Marcus. It was waiting. Waiting killed her. Marcus felt something massive break open inside his chest. All the years of unanswered questions. The guilt he'd carried without understanding why. The anger he'd never allowed himself to actually feel. Victoria grabbed his arm hard. Marcus, listen to yourself. This woman is manipulating you with guilt. Marcus pulled his arm away roughly. Stop. Victoria actually recoiled, genuine shock crossing her face. You knew, Marcus said, voice growing louder. You knew about my past. You knew how my mother died. And you still tried to keep Eleanor away from me. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger and fear. I was protecting you from this exact, emotional manipulation. Marcus shook his head slowly, sadly. No, you were protecting the wedding. Not me. Never me. He turned back to Eleanor, tears streaming down his face now, unashamed. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, voice cracking. Why wait all this time? Eleanor looked at him with infinite gentleness. Because you had to come to the truth yourself, Marcus. I can only wait for you to be ready to see it. Tears blurred Marcus's vision completely. He looked around the cathedral, at the wealth, at the spectacle, at the crushing weight of expectations from people who didn't actually know him at all. Then back at the fragile old woman who had asked for nothing but $12 and carried a truth too heavy for one person to bear. I can't marry today, Marcus said clearly, firmly. I can't do this. Victoria's careful composure finally shattered completely. You're choosing her over me? Over everything we built? Marcus met her gaze with unexpected calm. I'm choosing truth over performance, Victoria. I'm choosing reality over the life we were pretending to build. Security guards stepped forward again, uncertain what to do. Pastor Michael spoke softly, trying to salvage something. Perhaps we should pause. Take some time to. The ceremony is over, Marcus said. Completely over. Eleanor turned to leave, duty done, burden released. Marcus caught her hand gently. Don't go. Please don't go. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering. My part is finished, dear. No, Marcus replied firmly, voice strengthening. No, it's just beginning now. Please. As the guests erupted into absolute confusion, as Victoria stood frozen in disbelief and fury, as cameras captured every impossible moment, Marcus Chen walked away from that altar. Not in shame, not in defeat, but with a quiet, unshakable certainty he had never known in his entire carefully constructed life. Outside, brilliant sunlight poured through those massive cathedral doors. And for the first time in decades, Marcus stepped fully into it, finally carrying the complete weight of his past, his truth, his mother's memory. Eleanor Hayes walked beside him, leaning on her stick, and together they stepped into whatever came next. Because some truths refuse to stay buried, and some kinds of waiting finally come to an end. The story continues with Marcus's journey toward justice, toward healing, toward becoming the man his mother hoped he would be. Eleanor's health declines, but her purpose is fulfilled. Marcus establishes the Lin Chun Care Initiative. He faces backlash, threats, powerful enemies who want the truth buried again. But he doesn't stop. He can't stop. Because Eleanor taught him that waiting with dignity is powerful, but acting with truth is freedom. And in her final days, as Marcus holds Eleanor's hand in a hospital room, this time with doctors who care, with medicine that works, with dignity restored, she smiles and whispers, "Your mother would be so proud." And then, peacefully, Eleanor Hayes closes her eyes for the last time. The funeral is simple. Marcus speaks. The city changes, slowly but surely. And at the bus terminal, a memorial bench honors the woman who waited so others wouldn't have to. Marcus visits often, placing $12 there each time, watching the city move forward, imperfect but no longer silent. Because one woman waited with unshakable faith, and one man finally listened with his whole broken heart.